For 12 years, I believed Vanessa and I were steady, our marriage a steady rhythm of ordinary life. We weren't the type to boast about lavish vacations or extravagant parties, but we had something real. Our world revolved around our 2 kids, Liam and Chloe, and the familiar routines of family life. Dinners around the table, weekend soccer games, and quiet evenings spent curled up watching old movies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I thought we were a team. Vanessa had always been my support during both the highs and lows of my career, and I tried to be the same for her as she climbed the ranks in her own field. Recently, she'd gotten promoted, which meant longer hours and a new group of colleagues. One name came up often, Derek. At first, I didn't think much of it. She would mention Derek's ideas or how he contributed in a meeting. But as time passed, it seemed like his name appeared more and more, always with a hint of admiration in her voice. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Vanessa had always been loyal, and I had no reason to doubt her. But something about the way she spoke about Derek made my chest tighten. Vanessa's time at work seemed to increase. She started coming home later with vague excuses about project deadlines or team dinners. And when she was home, it felt like she was somewhere else, her attention fixed on her phone or laptop. Conversations became shorter, more rehearsed, and arguments began to replace the quiet moments we used to share. I felt like I was living with someone I didn't know anymore. Then one evening at dinner, Chloe asked if her mom would be home early the next day to watch her school play. Vanessa hesitated, looking at her phone before replying. "I'll try, sweetie, but I can't promise. I have a late meeting with Derek." Liam groaned. "You're always working. Can't Derek handle it for once?" Vanessa shot him a sharp look. "Liam, that's enough." I stayed quiet, but the comment gnawed at me. Even the kids were noticing how often she was gone. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't hold back anymore. "You've been spending a lot of time at work lately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Feels like we're not a priority anymore." Vanessa sighed, not looking up from her phone. "It's just a busy time, Daniel. You know how it is." I pressed on. "Yeah, but it feels like work comes first, and we're being pushed aside. What about the kids? What about us?" She finally looked at me, her expression tired, almost irritated. "What do you expect me to do? Quit my job? Derek and I are leading this huge project. I can't just walk away." I swallowed hard, deciding not to argue further, but the distance between us seemed to grow each day. Our marriage was becoming a series of miscommunications and silences. Vanessa seemed more irritable, snapping at me for small things. Conversations were either arguments or dead ends. I began to focus more on the kids, trying to provide them with stability, even though it felt like Vanessa and I were both failing in that department. One evening, as Vanessa worked late in her home office, I stood at the doorway and watched her for a moment. She didn't notice me, lost in whatever was on her laptop. I wanted to ask her what was going on, to tell her how much I missed us, but the words stuck in my throat. I turned away and went to the couch, where I spent most nights alone. The more time passed, the more I wondered if our marriage was beyond saving. The family I had worked so hard to build seemed to be falling apart, and I had no idea how to fix it. Vanessa's whole demeanor was changing. She was dismissive, annoyed by my presence. The warmth that used to define our relationship had faded, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar silence. One evening, as I cleared the table, I noticed Vanessa laughing softly at something on her phone. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just something Derek sent," she replied, her eyes still glued to the screen. "He's hilarious." Her words stung more than I expected. It wasn't jealousy, but the realization that someone else had taken the place in her life where I used to be. As the weeks went by, Derek's name became a constant presence in our home. Every conversation seemed to circle back to him. "Derek thinks this," or "Derek said that." I tried to convince myself it was just work-related, but my gut told me otherwise. The final blow came at a work event that Vanessa insisted I attend with her. I wasn't thrilled, but I thought it might be an opportunity to reconnect, even if just for a night. Instead, it felt like I was intruding on a date between Vanessa and Derek, the awkwardness palpable. From the moment we walked in, it was clear I wasn't part of her world anymore. Derek was everywhere. He greeted Vanessa with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. His hand lingered on her back just a little too long, and their laughter filled the air as if they were the only two people in the room. I stood there, awkwardly sipping my drink, making small talk with strangers while they carried on like nothing else mattered. At one point, I saw Derek lean in and whisper something into Vanessa's ear. She laughed, leaning into him, her hand brushing his arm in a way that made my chest tighten. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there a few feet away. I waited until we were alone to confront her. "What's going on with you and Derek?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Vanessa rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. "Nothing, Daniel. He's just a coworker." "A coworker?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "A coworker who whispers in your ear and makes you laugh like that? It doesn't look like nothing." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're being ridiculous. This is why I didn't want you to come tonight. You always overreact." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way she dismissed my feelings so easily. I wanted to argue, to make her see how her actions were affecting me, but I knew it would only escalate into another fight. So I let it go for the moment. That night, as we drove home, the tension between us was suffocating. Vanessa was glued to her phone, texting someone with a faint smile on her lips. I didn't need to ask who it was. "Vanessa," I said, breaking the silence, "I need you to hear me out." She sighed and set her phone down but didn't look at me. "What now, Daniel?" "I don't like the way Derek interacts with you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's disrespectful to me, to our marriage." She finally turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "You're jealous," she said flatly. "That's what this is about. You're insecure, and you're projecting it onto me." Her words cut deeper than she realized. I wasn't jealous. I was hurt. Hurt by the growing distance between us. Hurt by the way she seemed to prioritize Derek over our family. Hurt by how she made me feel like I didn't matter anymore. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "I'm trying to protect what we have." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Maybe you should focus on fixing yourself instead of trying to control me." The conversation ended there, both of us retreating into silence. I stared out the window, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quite articulate. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I once considered my partner become someone I barely recognized? In the following days, I tried to keep my distance, hoping that the space would ease the tension, but it didn't. Vanessa continued to bring up Derek in casual conversation, her tone light and carefree as if nothing had changed. I couldn't tell if she was oblivious to the damage she was causing, or if she just didn't care. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I noticed her phone light up with a text. She glanced at the screen, smiled, and quickly replied before setting it face down on the table. My heart sank. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. "Vanessa," I said, my voice breaking the silence. "Do you even want to fix this?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Fix what?" "Us." I nodded. "Our marriage." She hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know, Daniel. Maybe I'm just tired of feeling like I have to babysit your insecurities." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, searching for the woman I had loved for over a decade, but she wasn't there. Vanessa was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop her. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something painful but undeniable. I couldn't save our marriage on my own. If Vanessa wasn't willing to fight for us, then maybe it was already over. Vanessa's distant behavior wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was affecting the kids. Liam and Chloe were sharp, perceptive, and they could sense the growing tension in the house. They asked fewer questions about their mom's late nights and stayed out of her way when she was home. But I could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. It broke my heart. They deserved better than this version of our family. And then there was Derek. He wasn't just a name in conversations or a shadowy figure in Vanessa's stories anymore. He was a physical presence in our lives. He started showing up at the house under the guise of helping Vanessa with work. At first, I tolerated it, reasoning that maybe he was just a co-worker trying to assist her with her busy schedule. But it didn't take long for his visits to cross a line. Derek was loud, arrogant, and far too comfortable in my home. He would saunter in, cracking jokes as if he were the head of the household, and Vanessa would laugh at his every word. It felt like I was invisible. Even worse, he started engaging with Liam and Chloe in a way that felt performative, as if he were trying to ingratiate himself into their lives. Chloe, ever the polite one, would smile and nod, but Liam wasn't as easily charmed. He would glare at Derek, his lips pressed into a thin line, and retreat to his room whenever Derek showed up. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table helping Chloe with her homework, Derek arrived unannounced. He walked in with a box of takeout, grinning as if he owned the place. "Thought I'd bring dinner for everyone," he announced, setting the box down on the counter. I looked up, my jaw tightening. "We've already eaten," I said flatly. Vanessa breezed into the room, brushing past me to grab plates from the cabinet. "Well, I haven't," she said dismissively. "Thanks, Derek. You didn't have to do that." "Anything for you," Derek replied, winking at her. My grip on the pencil in my hand tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Chloe glanced between the three of us, her small face clouded with confusion. "I'll finish this in my room, Dad," she whispered before slipping away. Later that evening, Derek lingered in the living room long after I thought he should have left. Liam came downstairs for a glass of water and froze in the doorway, watching as Derek leaned back on the couch, his arm draped casually over the backrest near Vanessa. The sight made my blood boil. "Derek," I said, standing up and walking into the room, "it's getting late. Don't you have somewhere else to be?" Derek smirked, not bothering to move. "Relax, Daniel. We're just going over some work stuff." "I think you've done enough work for one night," I said, my voice firm. "It's time to go." Vanessa rolled her eyes, setting her laptop aside. "Daniel, stop being so dramatic. He's just helping me with the presentation for tomorrow." "Then he can help you from his own home," I snapped. Derek finally stood up, but not before leaning in toward Vanessa, giving her a playful grin. I couldn't stand it anymore. The line had been crossed. As the days passed, the reality of the situation began to settle in. The house, once filled with the sounds of a family, now felt hollow. Daniel spent his nights replaying the events in his mind, questioning whether he could have done something differently. But deep down, he knew that Derek's intrusion was merely the catalyst for a much larger issue, a marriage that had been crumbling long before Derek entered the picture. Vanessa reached out a few days later, her tone softer but still defensive. "Daniel, we need to talk about this. You can't just shut me out like this," she said over the phone. Her voice carried a hint of desperation, but Daniel remained firm. "There's nothing left to talk about, Vanessa," he replied, his voice steady. "You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. This isn't just about Derek, it's about us. About how you've let someone come between us, how you've let him disrespect me in my own home. I can't live like that anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Vanessa finally spoke. "I didn't realize it had gotten this bad," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was just harmless flirting, that it didn't mean anything. I didn't think it would hurt you this much." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't just the flirting, Vanessa. It was the way you let him undermine me, the way you defended him over me. You made me feel like I didn't matter in my own home. And that's not something I can just forgive and forget." The conversation ended with Vanessa in tears, but Daniel knew he had to stay strong. For himself and for his kids. He couldn't let them grow up in a home where respect and love were conditional, where the father was treated as an afterthought. Over the next few weeks, Daniel focused on rebuilding his life. He spent more time with Liam and Chloe, taking them to the park, helping with homework, and simply being present. He could see the relief in their eyes, the way they seemed to relax now that the tension in the house was gone. It was a small comfort, but it gave him the strength to keep moving forward. Vanessa moved out shortly after, staying with a friend while they worked through the legalities of their separation. The divorce proceedings were painful, but Daniel knew it was the right decision. He couldn't stay in a marriage where he felt invisible, where his feelings and his role as a father were constantly undermined. As the months passed, Daniel began to find a new sense of purpose. He reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym, and even took up a new hobby. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything threatened to crush him, but he refused to let it. He had fought too hard to regain control of his life to let it slip away again. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching Liam and Chloe play in the yard, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He had taken back control of his life, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew he could face them, for himself and for his kids. Finally, I felt a breath of relief. Space to think clearly, to exist without the constant weight pressing down on me. But peace, it seemed, was fleeting. At 9 p.m., a message from Vanessa interrupted the silence. "We need to talk. You can't just lock me out of the house like this." My grip on the phone tightened as I read the words. Her nerve was unbelievable. After everything she'd done, she still believed she had some kind of upper hand. I typed a quick reply, "Talk to my lawyer." The phone rang a moment later, her name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't let her manipulate me any longer. This wasn't about her feelings or her attempts to justify everything. It was about protecting myself, my kids, and moving forward. The next day, I walked into my lawyer's office and officially filed for divorce. It felt strange, like I was discussing someone else's life, but the reality of the situation was clear. Vanessa had crossed too many lines, and there was no turning back. "You're likely going to have to fight for custody," my lawyer cautioned. "Are you ready for that?" "Let her try," I responded coldly. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep my kids safe. She's the one who brought the chaos into their lives, not me." In the weeks that followed, I focused on providing stability for Liam and Chloe. We moved their belongings into my sister's guest room, ensuring they had everything they needed to feel at home. I kept things simple, not wanting to complicate the situation further. "Mom and Dad are just taking some time apart," I'd say, and though it was a lot for them to process, they seemed to adjust, their strength leaving me in awe. Liam, thoughtful as always, began to ask questions about the future. He spoke with relief about Derek being gone, and Chloe, ever the optimist, embraced the small joys, movie nights, bedtime stories, and weekends at the park. Vanessa, meanwhile, wasn't giving up. Her texts flooded my phone, each one more accusatory than the last, calling me controlling, paranoid, and unreasonable. I ignored them all, following my lawyer's advice. Silence was my strongest weapon. Then one evening, she showed up unannounced. The pounding on the door echoed in the quiet house. When I looked through the peephole, there she was, flushed with anger. "Daniel, open the door," she yelled. "You can't just cut me out like this." I didn't respond. I stood quietly behind the door as she hammered on it again. Eventually, she stopped. Her voice softened as she muttered, "You think you've won. You'll see this isn't over." As she walked away, I felt a strange mixture of anger, sadness, and a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe. Perhaps this wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time I felt like I was finally in control. No one, least of all Vanessa, was going to take that from me. The next morning, I knew I had to act quickly. Vanessa's erratic behavior couldn't interfere with the stability I was working so hard to create for my kids. I reached out to my lawyer again to make sure everything was in place. If she planned to contest custody, I was ready for the fight. We met again, and I laid out everything: the toxic environment Derek had created, Vanessa's failure to set boundaries, and the chaos it all caused for the children. My lawyer took notes, her pen flying across the page. "You have a strong case for full custody," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to be strategic. Document everything. Every interaction, every message. The more evidence we gather, the better." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes. I want them to have a stable, healthy environment." That afternoon, I took steps to secure my financial future. The accounts had been frozen, but I took it a step further, closing joint credit cards, rerouting direct deposits, and ensuring that Vanessa couldn't access any of my funds. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and my kids from any reckless decisions she might make. When I returned home that evening, the silence hit me. Liam and Chloe were still at my sister's, and the house felt unnervingly empty. I decided to keep busy, sorting through old photos, forgotten toys, and papers that had built up over the years. As I sifted through the clutter, I found a picture of Vanessa and me from our early days of marriage. We looked happy, carefree, full of hope for the future. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. But the answer wasn't in the past, it was in the decisions we had made along the way, the cracks we ignored until they were impossible to fix. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. Another message from Vanessa. "You're being unfair, Daniel. You can't just shut me out like this. We need to talk about what's best for the kids." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer. Vanessa's definition of what's best for the kids had been clouded by her selfish decisions for too long. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The following day, I met with a family therapist to discuss how best to support Liam and Chloe during this transition. The therapist offered practical advice. Consistency and reassurance were key. She reminded me to make sure the kids knew they were loved and that none of this was their fault. Later that evening, when I picked up Liam and Chloe, they ran to me, their faces lighting up. "Dad, can we have pizza for dinner?" Liam asked, his voice hopeful. "Of course," I replied, ruffling his hair. "Anything for you." Over dinner, we talked about their day, and I made plans for the weekend. For a moment, it felt like everything was right again. I was determined to give them the stability they deserved, no matter how difficult things might get. Vanessa, however, wasn't done. Her messages grew more frequent, and soon she began telling mutual friends that I was being unreasonable and controlling. One evening, a friend called, hoping to mediate. "Daniel, don't you think you're being a little harsh? Vanessa is struggling too. Maybe you should try to work things out for the kids' sake." I took a deep breath. "I appreciate your concern," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But this isn't about being harsh. It's about protecting my kids from a situation that isn't healthy. Vanessa made her choices, and now I'm making mine." The conversation ended there, and I hung up, feeling drained but resolute. It wasn't easy to keep defending my actions, but I knew I was doing the right thing. As the weeks went by, I focused on building a new routine for Liam and Chloe. We had homework sessions at the kitchen table, movie nights on Fridays, and trips to the park on weekends. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like a home again. Vanessa's messages became less frequent, though the few I did receive were bitter and filled with resentment. It was clear she wasn't accustomed to losing control, and she didn't know how to handle it. But I didn't let her anger distract me. My priority was my children, and I was determined to stay focused on what they needed. One evening, as I tucked Chloe into bed, she looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled, kissing her forehead. "We're going to be more than okay," I promised. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. With the battles raging and Vanessa largely fading from the picture, I began to focus inward for the first time in years. I realized that I had to prioritize myself, not just as a father, but as a man who deserved more than the chaos Vanessa had brought into my life. I started my days early, waking up before the kids, so I could have a quiet moment with my coffee to plan out the day. Once the kids were awake, I made sure they were ready for school, packing lunches, getting Liam's soccer gear together, and ensuring Chloe had her favorite book for reading time. Dropping them off at school became a reminder of why I was working so hard for them. They were the reason I was fighting for a better life. After the kids were settled at school, I threw myself into my work. The projects I had been juggling were finally coming together, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had control again. I reconnected with old colleagues and explored opportunities one had never considered before. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt the professional confidence Vanessa's constant belittling had chipped away at. But it wasn't just my career that improved. I began taking better care of myself physically too. I joined a local gym and started working out regularly. My frustration with everything I had been through pushed me to channel my energy into something productive. The physical changes were immediate, but the real transformation was in my mental clarity. With each workout, I felt stronger, not just in my body, but in my resolve. The kids noticed, too. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, Chloe looked at me and said, "Dad, you look happier." Her words took me by surprise, and I had to fight back tears. "Thanks, sweetie," I said, pulling her close. "That means a lot." Liam, who had been quieter since everything with Vanessa happened, began opening up more. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked, "Do you think Mom will come back?" I paused for a moment, sitting beside him. "Liam, your mom will always be a part of your life, but things are different now," I said gently. "What matters is that you and Chloe are safe and happy. I'll do everything I can to make sure of that." He nodded, understanding in a way I didn't expect. "I like it better here now," he whispered. "It feels peaceful." His words stuck with me long after he fell asleep. They reminded me that the decisions I was making, as hard as they were the right ones. The kids needed peace, and I was determined to give that to them. Over the next few months, Vanessa's presence in our lives began to shrink. Her messages became infrequent, and the few times she reached out, it was clear she was struggling. She had underestimated how much of her life had relied on mine, financially, emotionally, even socially. Without the support I had provided, she was drifting. Meanwhile, I was finding myself again, maybe even a stronger version of the person I had once been. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years because I had been too caught up in the whirlwind of my marriage. One of these friends introduced me to Sophia. Sophia was unlike anyone I had met before. Kind, warm, yet fiercely independent and confident. We met for coffee one afternoon, and what was supposed to be a short conversation turned into hours of deep discussion. She listened to my struggles without judgment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly heard. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," she said thoughtfully, "but the fact that you're here, moving forward, says a lot about your strength." Her words stuck with me more than I expected. "It hasn't been easy," I admitted, "but I'm trying." "Well," she said with a gentle smile, "trying is more than most people do." Over the next few weeks, Sophia and I grew closer. She was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that love didn't have to be painful or complicated. She met Liam and Chloe, and they adored her. Chloe would curl up on her lap during movie nights, and Liam would show her his latest soccer moves. Seeing her with my kids felt natural, as though she was meant to be a part of our lives. Vanessa, of course, didn't take kindly to hearing about Sophia. One evening, she sent me a long, angry message, accusing me of moving on too quickly and replacing her in the kids' lives. I didn't respond. Her bitterness was her burden to carry, not mine. Sophia, for her part, handled the situation with grace. "She's hurting," she said when I told her about the message. "That doesn't excuse what she's done, but it explains why she's lashing out. Just keep focusing on the kids and your future. That's what matters." Sophia was right. My focus had shifted. I was no longer consumed by the past or by Vanessa's mistakes. I was focused on the future I was building, one full of love, stability, and hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, leaving the pain and chaos behind. At the same time, the legal proceedings against Derek were unfolding. The first revelation was telling. Derek had been embezzling funds from his company for years to maintain his lavish lifestyle. Flashy cars, expensive suits, and dinners. He had used these to charm people like Vanessa. It wasn't surprising, really. Men like him often hide behind arrogance to mask their insecurities and lack of integrity. Once the investigation began, a pattern of financial misconduct spanning years was uncovered. It also turned out that he had been manipulating several colleagues into silence with threats and promises. What shocked me most, though, was how deeply Vanessa had been tied to it all. She hadn't been directly involved in the embezzlement, but her name appeared frequently in the documents. The lavish dinners, company gifts written off as expenses, and luxury spa charges, all tied to Derek's corporate credit card and benefiting Vanessa. My lawyer kept me updated throughout the process, and I did everything I could to assist. I wanted the truth to come out, not just for justice's sake, but to protect Liam and Chloe from any further chaos. If Vanessa thought Derek was her ticket to happiness, she was about to learn how wrong she had been. When Derek was arrested, it felt surreal. I wasn't there to witness it, but I heard about it from mutual contacts. He was at his office, still smug and untouchable, when the police arrived to escort him out in handcuffs. The image of his arrest quickly circulated online, and seeing his name tied to headlines about fraud and corporate scandal brought an odd sense of closure. The man who had humiliated me, invaded my home, and disrespected my family was finally facing consequences. Vanessa's response to the news was predictable. She initially tried to play the victim, insisting she had no idea what Derek had been doing. "I thought he was just successful," she said in a voicemail. "I didn't know he was a fraud." I didn't bother responding. Her claims might have carried some weight if she hadn't so willingly participated in the perks of Derek's schemes. She had chosen to align herself with him, and now she was facing the fallout. It didn't take long for her to feel the consequences. She lost her job. Her employer wanted nothing to do with someone connected to such a scandal. Friends who once admired her lifestyle distanced themselves, and she found herself isolated, scrambling to rebuild the life she had helped destroy. One evening, as I was finishing dinner with Liam and Chloe, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "I need to talk to you. Please, Daniel, just give me 5 minutes." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I had nothing left to say to her. She had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. My priority was my children, and I wasn't about to let her drama disrupt the peace we had worked so hard to create. Chloe noticed my change in expression and tilted her head curiously. "Everything okay, Dad?" I smiled, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "Yeah, everything's good, sweetie. Everything's been calm, peaceful even, something I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of control, a clarity I never thought I'd regain. The chaos that had dominated my life with Vanessa had faded, replaced by a steady, comforting rhythm. Liam and Chloe were flourishing in the stability we had built, and I was more focused than ever on giving them the love and security they deserved. Sophia played a huge role in that balance. She was patient, kind, and never pushed me, but was always there, supporting me when I needed it most. She helped with the kids, offered advice when I asked for it, and reminded me that I didn't have to face the world alone. Her presence was a constant source of peace and strength. As Derek's trial approached, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. The man I had been, weak, uncertain, defeated, felt like a stranger. Back then, I was lost, unsure of my place, broken by the betrayal. Now, I was strong, confident, and deeply rooted in the life I was rebuilding. When Derek was sentenced to several years in prison for fraud and embezzlement, it felt like the final page of a painful chapter was turned. Vanessa's attempts to reconnect had slowly dwindled, and eventually they stopped altogether. She became a shadow of the past, a distant memory that no longer had a hold over me. One evening, as I sat with Sophia on the porch, watching the stars with a glass of wine in hand, she smiled at me. "You did it, Daniel," she said softly. "You fought for your kids, for yourself, and you won." I looked at her, my heart full of gratitude. "I didn't do it alone," I replied. "You've been my anchor through all of this." She leaned against me, her warmth a reminder of everything that had come from the ashes of my past. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "The best is yet to come." For the first time, I truly believed her. Months after Derek's arrest and Vanessa's descent into obscurity, life began to settle into a rhythm. Maybe it was better than normal. The chaos and betrayal that once haunted my every day were now distant memories. In their place was peace, a peace I had long yearned for. Liam and Chloe had adjusted beautifully, and our home, once filled with tension, now echoed with laughter. One Saturday morning, as I sat at the breakfast table sipping my coffee, while Chloe worked on an art project and Liam sketched in his notebook, it felt like the most unremarkable moment. But it was exactly what I had been fighting for, a stable, happy home where my kids could grow and thrive. "Dad," Liam suddenly asked, looking up from his notebook, "do you think we'll ever see Mom again?" The question took me by surprise. Vanessa's absence had been a relief for me, but I knew the kids still missed her, despite everything. I set my coffee down and met his gaze. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "But what I do know is that you and Chloe are my top priority. I'll always make sure you're safe and happy." Chloe piped up with a cheerful voice. "We happy now, Dad, right?" Liam nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we are." Their words filled me with warmth and strength. I had done the right thing by cutting Vanessa out of our lives, even though it hadn't been easy. Sophia continued to be a pillar of support, not just for me, but for the kids as well. She had become an essential part of our family, and the kids adored her. Chloe would often curl up next to her on the couch during movie nights, and Liam loved showing her his soccer moves in the backyard. Watching their bond grow was a joy I hadn't expected, and it made me believe even more that we were creating something special. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Sophia and I sat on the couch together. She turned to me with a thoughtful look on her face. "How do you feel about everything now?" she asked gently. "With Vanessa, Derek, the divorce, all of it." I took a deep breath, considering her question. "I feel free," I said. "For so long I was carrying this weight, trying to fix something that was beyond repair, holding on to a version of Vanessa that didn't exist anymore. Letting go was hard, but it was the best thing I could have done for myself and for the kids." Sophia smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered softly. Her words meant more to me than she could know. It wasn't just about surviving the betrayal. It was about rebuilding my life, creating a better future for myself and my children. And with Sophia by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. One day, while running errands, I unexpectedly ran into Vanessa. She was standing outside a cafe, her face pale and worn, the once confident person I had known replaced by someone fragile, unsure. She saw me before I could slip away, and her eyes widened. "Daniel," she said, walking toward me. "Hi, Vanessa," I replied, my tone neutral. "How are you?" She hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I'm managing," she said softly. "I heard about Derek." "Everyone has," I said flatly, not trying to hide my indifference. She winced but pressed on. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I know I messed up and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear that." Her apology caught me off guard, but it didn't stir anything inside me. No anger, no sadness, just a detached pity for the person she had become. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, "but I've moved on." She nodded, her eyes downcast, and we parted ways. Her apology didn't change anything. I was no longer the man I had been, and that was enough. Eyes downcast, I could sense the weight of her gaze, but I didn't feel the familiar sting anymore. "I could see that you look happy," she had said. "I am," I replied, and for the first time I truly meant it. As I walked away, there was no lingering anger or sadness, just a feeling of quiet closure. Vanessa's regret was hers to carry now, not mine. I had no desire to revisit that painful chapter. My life wasn't defined by her choices anymore. It was defined by the future I was building, one step at a time. At home that evening, I told Sophia about the encounter. She listened quietly, her hand gently resting on mine. When I finished, she smiled warmly, her eyes full of pride. "You handled that with grace," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "I'm proud of you." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I reflected on the journey I had taken to get to this point. The man I had become, the stronger, wiser, and more confident version of myself, was a far cry from the broken man Vanessa had tried to tear down. I had rebuilt myself. I had reclaimed my life. And in doing so, I had created something beautiful. Later that night, as I tucked Liam and Chloe into bed, Chloe looked up at me with those big, bright eyes of hers. "Dad," she said, her voice small but filled with hope, "do you think everything's going to stay happy like this?" I smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I think we're just getting started," I said softly. "The best is yet to come." And as I walked out of their room, I knew in my heart that it was true. With Sophia by my side and the kids thriving, I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, a life full of love, laughter, and endless possibilities. Then, the day I had been waiting for arrived. It wasn't just any ordinary day. This was a day that would mark the beginning of something even more beautiful. A day that symbolized not just a new chapter in my life, but the culmination of everything I had fought for, the struggles, the growth, and the victories. It was a bright, crisp morning when I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie on my suit. Today wasn't just another day. Today, Sophia and I were getting married. Liam stood beside me, straightening his little bow tie, his reflection in the mirror mirroring my proud smile. "You nervous, Dad?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. I knelt down to adjust his tie, shaking my head with a smile. "Not at all," I replied. "I'm ready. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." His grin widened, and before he could say anything more, he wrapped his arms around me in a quick hug. "I'm happy for you, Dad. And for Sophia. She's the best." Hearing those words from Liam meant the world to me. Both he and Chloe had embraced Sophia with open arms, and seeing the bond they had formed with her over the past months had been one of the greatest joys of my life. Sophia wasn't just the love of my life. She was someone who had brought light and warmth into our family in a way I hadn't thought possible. The ceremony was held in a picturesque garden, surrounded by our closest friends, family, and the people who had supported us through the hardest times. As I stood at the altar, watching Sophia walk toward me, my heart swelled with gratitude. She looked breathtaking. Her smile was radiant as she approached, with Chloe walking beside her, tossing flower petals with giddy excitement. Liam stood proudly as my best man, his face beaming with happiness. When Sophia finally reached me, she took my hands in hers. Her eyes never left mine, her emotions clear in the way she looked at me. In that moment, it felt like everything else faded away. The pain of the past, the struggles we had endured. It all felt like a distant memory. All that mattered now was the future we were building together. The vows we exchanged were simple, but they carried the weight of our journey. "I promise to stand by you through every challenge and every triumph," I told her. "You've shown me what true partnership looks like, and I'm so grateful to walk this path with you." Sophia's voice trembled slightly as she responded, her gaze unwavering. "You've shown me what strength, resilience, and love truly mean," she said. "With you, I found my home." When the ceremony ended and we were pronounced husband and wife, the applause and cheers from our loved ones filled the air. I kissed Sophia, holding her close as Liam and Chloe ran to join us, their laughter ringing out like music. It was a moment I would treasure forever, a moment that symbolized everything I had fought for. The reception was a joyous celebration, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. My sister Samantha stood up to speak, her voice thick with emotion as she recounted the journey I had been on. "Daniel," she said, "you've shown all of us what it means to rise above. You've built something truly beautiful, and I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become." Liam and Chloe gave their own short speeches, their words sweet and genuine. "We love you, Dad," Liam said, glancing at Sophia with a shy smile. "And we love Sophia, too. Thanks for making us a family." Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged them both, my heart full of gratitude for the life we were creating together. Later in the evening, I took a quiet moment to step outside. The garden was illuminated by soft string lights, and the distant sounds of music and laughter drifted through the air. As I stood there, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment, Sophia found me. She slipped her hand into mine. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "More than okay," I replied, my voice full of contentment. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. It feels surreal." Sophia smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You deserve this, Daniel. Every bit of it. You've worked so hard to build this life, and now it's yours." I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "Ours," I corrected. "We built this together." As the night came to an end and we said our goodbyes to friends and family, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggles, they had all led me here, to a life filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Sophia and I worked together to create a home full of warmth and laughter. Liam and Chloe thrived, their bond with Sophia growing stronger every day. We planned family trips, shared meals, and celebrated the little moments that made life so special. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophia turned to me with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soft. I glanced at her, my heart full. "Everything," I said, my voice filled with contentment. "How far we've come. How lucky I am." She leaned against me, her hand resting on mine. "The best is yet to come," she said softly, her voice full of hope and certainty. And for the first time in years, I believed her. My life, once defined by chaos and betrayal, had become a testament to resilience, love, and the power of starting over. With Sophia by my side and the kids thriving, I knew the future was bright. This was the life I had fought for, and it was more than I ever could have imagined.